of today, the 5th of October 2023. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and Chair of the meeting as the leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources. I think the first thing I have to do is a big welcome to our new member today, Councillor Sandra Perks, in her first meeting as Cabinet Member for public sector housing and tenant engagement. And I also need to express my thanks to Councillor Gwyn John for his help in managing the portfolio over the past few months. He's done a sterling job. Really look forward to working with you, Sandra. If I could remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and that the recording will then be archived for future viewing. All participants should mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback. And if anyone wants to speak, they should raise their hand either on screen, as most participants are on screen, or using the digital hands up function. The chat function should only be used to highlight any technical issues and or to attract the attention of the Chair of Democratic Services or the Democratic Services Officer. We've got a fairly light agenda overall, but I do have one urgent item which I will deal with at agenda item 10, and I also have one urgent part 2 item, and I will deal with that. Sorry, I'll deal with the urgent part 1 item at agenda item 9, and I'll deal with the urgent part 2 item at agenda item 10. So if we move to the agenda itself, we'll start with agenda item 1, and that's apologies for absence. And as the most observant will note that we don't have Councillor Brooks with us today, so if I could give her apologies. And then I'm just moving things around on screens. And then agenda item 2, I will move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of September 2023. And can I take those as an accurate record of that meeting? Yeah. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'm seconding that.
Right, thank you, Rhiannon. And everybody else was in agreement. Let's have a look. Agenda item 3 is any declarations of interest, and if there are, the nature of the interest. Do we have any interest today? I haven't been notified of any. No. Shaking heads. And then moving on to agenda item 4. That's the report of a meeting. That's the Cardiff Bay Advisory Committee on the 6th of September 2023. And I believe as a member of that committee, I think you're chair actually, aren't you, Mark?
Yes.
That Councillor Wilson will take this item.
Thank you very much, Leader. And this basically is a committee that meets quarterly in many occasions, and it's really concerning matters relating to the Cardiff Bay area in particular. And we had a very interesting meeting on the 6th of September. Basically, I've been reappointed, and I'm very grateful for members to reappoint me on that. And Councillor Neil Thomas is now the new vice chair. He succeeded ex-councillor, I should say, Councillor Andrew Parker, who's now had his last meeting. And first of all, I'd like to say something about Andrew. Andrew did sterling service in the committee for many, many years. He always brought his Sydney knowledge and experience to the committee, and I'm very grateful. And in some ways, rather saddened that he's left this committee, but now he's retired from it. So we wish him well. I'm sure we do. In terms of other matters that were discussed at the meeting, we obviously looked at the timetable meetings going forward, and we got meetings in November, February and May, and we rotate between in-person and remote on that. And then we also had reports from the Harbour Authority in terms of navigational safety. We also had a progress report from the Harbour Authority as well about how things are going in terms of the barrage, and we're looking at things like the sluices, the maintenance campaign on that. We also looked at things like the events that have in the Bay. And also, we also had a very interesting report from Natural Resources Wales, which obviously looked at some of the issues that we have now. Some of the issues are really affected by climate change, because one of the issues we have is, a decline in salmon numbers, and that's quite a serious issue. And we also had issues early on in the year when we didn't have much rain. We had issues with water levels in the Blackweir Docks feeder canal, and that caused a few problems for ABP. Fortunately, that was resolved largely because the weather, as you know, we had a lot of rain in August and September. So obviously, it's a very interesting report that we had at this, and I'm thankful for all the organisations having their input. So I like to move the minutes.
And I'm happy to second that, Mark. That's super. And are we all happy to note? Yeah, that's great.
You're muted, leader.
I was speaking so eloquently then, as absolutely typical. So yes, I'll move on to agenda item 5. And this is the first of my reports, and that's the Cabinet Quarterly Work Programmes from July to September 2023 and October to December 2023. This is a standard item. It's mainly housekeeping, but it's very, very useful because if you look at the appendices, it will tell you whether or not we're up to date with the work that we'd scheduled. And if you actually want to find any reports, you can look at it. There are links into those reports. But also it tells you what's going to be coming up over right through to December this year. So if you need to check on something that's of interest, you can have a look at the quarterly work programme. So as I said, it's all set out at either Appendix 1 or Appendix 2. And really, this is for us to firstly agree the quarterly work programme from July to September, and then to endorse the work programme from October to December. And those are the two recommendations before us today. And I'd move.
I'd like to second that, please.
Super, thank you. And no dissent. The next one is an update report, as promised from the last one, to inform Cabinet of the progress against the Shared Prosperity Fund local investment programme. And this is another sort of pot of funding that's come through from UK government. It's the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and there are a whole range of sort of aims and objectives to that programme, which if you look at the appendix at the end of the programme, I'm just finding the details of the appendix. So if you look at the appendix, not only does it go through the work that's being funded under a whole range of headings, but it also details the wider research that underpins those decisions. So where we're looking in terms of environmental issues, where we're looking in terms of economic development, where we're looking in terms of community needs, etc. This is a fund that covers the whole of Wales, but it's overseen for the Cardiff Capital Region by Rhondda Cynon Taf, and so they manage it on behalf of the region. So this report is actually going to Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee as part of their forward work programme for further discussion. So as I said, I won't go into it in greater detail today. So there's 3 recommendations before us today. That's that Cabinet notes the content of this report and considers the same. The Cabinet further notes that further reports are presented to Cabinet, which sets out progress against the allocations as set out in this report. So we really, with this amount of sort of finance, we want to keep updated on what it's being spent on and what the outcomes are, which is probably the more important thing. And that the report and Appendix A be referred to Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee for consideration as an item on the relevant committee forward work programme, and I therefore move.
I'd like to second those recommendations.
And we're all happy with that. That's good. And then agenda item 7, and that's the Vale of Glamorgan Community Review draft proposals. This is linked to the proposals in terms of tweaking any anomalies, etc., and catering for increases in sort of numbers of Vale residents, etc., to make sure that everybody is effectively represented at a community council level, and our community councils supported as as effectively as possible. This piece of work actually was as a result, it's one that we're required to do, but the greatest amount of discussion is going to be had tonight at the Community Liaison Committee, where there'll be members from town and community councils across the Vale. But I think it's also worth noting that the proposals that were submitted were actually as a result of a cross-party working group in the council. So every party within the Vale of Glamorgan Council has had an input into the proposals as they go forward. So as I said, there are situations where new wards have been created to represent sort of local demography, and one of those would be in the waterfront of Barry, where there would be a separate ward for the waterfront, which I think is very reasonable because it has its own specific nature and feel, rather than being part of a much larger one. And there are other examples of that, but I think there'll probably be a very in-depth conversation of this report tonight, and any reference will come back to us, so we can consider it further there. So if I just go to the recommendations on this report, and that's that the draft response to the Commission's draft proposals as set out in paragraphs 2.7 to 2.26 of this report are considered and approved, and a copy of this report be forwarded to the Boundary Commission as the formal response to the consultation. That Cabinet notes the deadline of 30th of October 2023 for comments to be submitted to the Commission, that a copy of this report be referred to Community Liaison Committee on 5th of October 2023, as mentioned just now, for consideration, and to all clerks of town and community councils in the Vale of Glamorgan for information, and that any recommendations to the Community Liaison Committee be referred back to Cabinet for further considerations. So as I said, as well as it going through the process here, if any town or community councils want to make their own submissions, then that they can do that as well. So I'm happy to move that, and
I'm happy to second. And can I
Super.
say that Penarth Town Council has made detailed representations, which will be coming up at Community Liaison tonight, and I look forward to the discussion.
So I'm going to be working till about 8 tonight again, so to watch that. But no, it should be a very interesting discussion tonight. So everybody seems content with that, so that's super. Those are my reports for now, and we'll go on to the others afterwards. So agenda item 8, it's over to Cabinet Member for Community Engagement, Equalities and Regulatory Services for the Vale of Glamorgan Local Development Plan 2011 to 2026 Annual Monitoring Report. Over to you, Ruba.
Thank you, Chair. So as Cabinet will know, that we are currently undergoing the review of our local development plan to take us forward from 2026. What I'm presenting to you today is as an annual monitoring report for 2022 to 23. So the annual monitoring report is part of the monitoring framework of the adopted LDP and assesses the overall performance of policies of the adopted plan. And it really just provides us with a snapshot of the effectiveness of the policies within the plan and helps us to identify any emerging trends which may be of concern. And of course, the findings of the annual monitoring report will also go towards and inform our emerging replacement local development plan, which is currently in the pre-deposit stage, as I mentioned. So overall, the annual monitoring report illustrates that good progress has been made in implementing most of the plan's policies. And overall, our LDP strategy remains sound. So Section 2 of the Cabinet report provides an overview of each of the main elements of the monitoring report and confirms that whilst most relevant monitoring targets continue to be met in several areas, there are some targets that haven't been achieved. And these primarily relate to areas that are likely to have been affected by the current economic climate across Wales and the UK, in fact. And whilst they are of concern, that the indicators will continue to be monitored, in the years going forward in our future annual monitoring reports, and will be considered in our review of our local development plan. So overall, there are 47 indicators scored green, 5 scored yellow, which really indicates where further research is required, and 2 scored amber, and 7 scored red. So if I just give you a sort of some examples, Chair. So where the targets have been met, these will have included a number of community facilities which were secured through, for example, Section 106 agreements, and the adoption of a number of supplementary planning guidance documents aimed at providing further clarity on our policies. And the annual monitoring report also shows that the LDP has been very effective in successfully restricting inappropriate development. So, for example, in 2022 to 23, there were no approvals for development on floodplains, for example, which weren't in accordance with our TAM 15 guidance. If you remember, Chair, I brought that review some time back. So, as I mentioned, where targets haven't been met, they're mostly linked to housing and employment delivery. And in terms of housing, whilst the number of dwellings granted planning permission is above our monitoring target at this point in the plan period, the number of units actually built is below what should have been delivered. And Chair, this is largely influenced by external factors. The war in Ukraine has had an impact, for example, on the availability and cost of building materials. And I think we know that throughout Wales and the UK. And with the cost of living crisis and the increases in mortgage interest rates, they've also affected demand. So all of these would have had an influence and an effect on those targets. I mean, finally, it's a requirement of the LDP regulations and monitoring framework that the annual monitoring report is endorsed by the council and is submitted to Welsh Government by the 31st of October each year. And so that requirement, Chair, is reflected in the recommendations. So if I could go to the recommendations, if I just bring up my other. So there are 3 recommendations. The first is that Cabinet considers and endorses the 5th Local Development Plan Annual Monitoring Report, subject to consideration of any recommended changes by the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, for submission to the Welsh Government by the 31st of October this year, and for publication on the Council's website. The second recommendation is that the local development plan's annual monitoring report is referred to Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee for its consideration, and should the Scrutiny Committee resolve to accept the local development plan annual monitoring report, Cabinet would consider the annual monitoring report as agreed and can be submitted to the Welsh Government by 31st of October. And finally, that delegated authority be granted to the Head of Sustainable Development in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Community Engagement, Equalities and Regulatory Services to make any typographical or other minor changes as necessary before publication. I'd like to move those recommendations.
Thank you, Ruba, and I'm happy to second those. Are we all happy to agree those? Yes, we are. Super, thank you. And then agenda item 9 is any items which the chair has decided are urgent, and as advised earlier, yes, I do have one. And this is a report, it's an agreement to enter into a supplemental agreement with the developer for the construction of new council apartments at Cadoxton Barry. This is part 1 report, so actually it's going to be for us to note this report, and the detailed financial discussions will take place in part 2, and as it's a confidential report. But in essence, the report discusses the intention to enter into a supplemental agreement with a developer of the site in Cadoxton Barry, which is for new council apartments, and to seek authority going forward to manage all matters relating to the appointment of a management contractor and subcontractors to recommence construction works at that site in Barry. Full financial details, I said, and details of the relevant procurement considerations are detailed in, or will be detailed in, the part 2 report under the next agenda item. And so Cabinet will be looking at both reports together. So the recommendations before us today is that the contents of this report be noted and considered in connection with the part 2 report later in the meeting agenda, and that Cabinet notes that the urgency procedure set out at section 1514 of the Council's Constitution be used in respect of recommendations continued within the part 2 report. And the reason for that is that we want to get construction back up and running, that we can continue to deliver that scheme. And so the relevant scrutiny chair has agreed for 1514 to be used in this situation, because obviously we'd go to the relevant scrutiny chair for agreement. So I would move those 2 recommendations.
I'd like to second those, please.
Thank you, and everyone's in agreement. So, as mentioned, the next report under agenda item 10 is a confidential report in terms of commercial confidentiality, and so we will move into private session of this meeting. So I will next move part 2, and then we'll ask the Democratic Services Officer to stop the recording of the meeting, and to ensure that anyone other than the appropriate people from the council are no longer present in the meeting. So if I could first move part 2.
Second.
Thank you. And Matt, could you make arrangements